3:07 a.m. Footsteps stopped right outside our door, my nose filled with smoke. Have you ever wondered what a dog thinks about when the world sleeps but danger lurks in the shadows? Let me tell you about the night that changed everything, when I became the only barrier between my human and something that should never have been there. My name is Max, and this is the story of how I learned that sometimes the most important job isn't guiding someone through the streets, but standing guard when they can't see what's coming. The Grand Plaza Hotel in Chicago had that particular smell that all hotels carry, a mixture of industrial cleaning products, countless strangers who had passed through these halls, and something else I could never quite identify. Room 412 had become our temporary home for 3 days, while Sarah attended her law conferences downtown. She always chose rooms on higher floors, saying it made her feel safer, though she never explained why. I understood. Even without sight, humans have instincts, and Sarah's were usually sharp. Tonight, the moonlight filtered through the heavy curtains, casting silver streaks across the burgundy carpet where I lay beside her bed. Sarah's breathing was deep and even, the kind of sleep that comes after 14 hours of presentations, networking dinners, and the constant mental exhaustion of navigating unfamiliar spaces. Her hand dangled over the edge of the mattress, fingers occasionally twitching as she dreamed. I had positioned myself strategically, close enough to respond instantly if she needed me, but far enough to avoid disturbing her rest. The hotel's air conditioning hummed steadily, creating a white noise that most would find comforting. But I've learned to listen beyond the obvious sounds. Beneath the mechanical drone, I could distinguish the elevator's occasional movement, the ice machine down the hall dispensing its frozen cargo, and the muffled sounds of late-night television from neighboring rooms. These were the normal rhythms of a building that never truly sleeps. But something felt different tonight. It started as a prickle along my spine, that inexplicable sensation that every dog knows but few humans understand. The hair on my neck began to rise, though I couldn't yet identify why. My ears rotated like radar dishes, scanning for the source of my unease. Sarah often told people that I was her eyes, but she didn't realize that I was also her early warning system for dangers she couldn't perceive. At 2:47 a.m., I had heard the elevator stop at our floor. Nothing unusual about that. People come and go at all hours in hotels. But the footsteps that emerged were different. They weren't the quick, purposeful stride of someone heading to their room after a late night out, nor the slow shuffle of someone tired and ready for bed. These steps were measured, deliberate, calculating. They moved with the careful precision of someone who didn't want to be noticed. I lifted my head from my paws, every sense now fully alert. The footsteps moved past several doors, pausing briefly at each one. My training had taught me to distinguish between normal hotel sounds and potential threats, and this definitely fell into the latter category. Sarah stirred slightly, her subconscious perhaps picking up on my increased alertness, but she remained asleep. The digital clock on the nightstand glowed 3:05 a.m. When I first caught the scent, it drifted under the door like an unwelcome visitor. Cigarette smoke mixed with something sharper, more chemical. Gasoline. My nose wrinkled at the acrid combination, and my body tensed. In all my years as Sarah's guide, I had never encountered this particular smell in a hotel hallway at 3 in the morning. Then came 3:07 a.m., and everything changed. The footsteps stopped directly outside our door. What happens when your every instinct screams danger, but the person you're sworn to protect sleeps peacefully, unaware that death might be standing just inches away? The silence that followed those stopped footsteps was deafening, not the comfortable quiet of a sleeping hotel, but the charged stillness that precedes a storm. My muscles coiled tight as springs, ready to explode into action, while my mind raced through every possible scenario my training had prepared me for. The scent grew stronger now, seeping under the door like poisonous fog, gasoline and cigarettes. But there was something else, something that made my lips curl back in an involuntary snarl. Fear. Human fear has a distinct smell, sharp and metallic, and it was mixing with the other odors in a combination that set every nerve in my body on fire. But whose fear was it? The person outside our door? Or was I somehow detecting the future terror of my sleeping human? I rose slowly from my position beside Sarah's bed, my paws silent on the thick carpet. Years of guide dog training had taught me to move without disturbing my human, and now that skill served a different purpose. My nose twitched as I sampled the air more carefully, trying to decode the olfactory message being delivered under our door. The gasoline smell was fresh, recent, as if someone had just handled fuel. My mind conjured terrible images, scenarios I had seen in news reports that Sarah sometimes listened to, stories that had always seemed distant and impossible until this moment. Sarah's breathing remained steady, but I noticed the slight change in her position that indicated her subconscious was picking up on my alertness. Her hand moved slightly on the pillow, and her head turned marginally toward the door. Even in sleep she was attuned to my movements, our bond so strong that my tension rippled through the air between us like disturbed water. The footsteps resumed, but differently now. Instead of the measured pace that had carried them down the hallway, these steps were lighter, more cautious. They weren't moving away from our door, they were moving closer to it. I could hear the soft whisper of fabric against the door frame, as if someone was pressing themselves against the wall beside our entrance. My hackles rose further, and I had to fight every instinct that demanded I bark an alarm. Something told me that stealth was more important than noise right now. A new sound joined the symphony of danger, the barely audible scratch of metal against metal. Someone was doing something to our door lock. My ears swiveled forward, straining to identify the sound. It wasn't the confident insertion of a proper keycard. This was tentative, exploratory, the sound of someone trying to manipulate a mechanism they didn't fully understand. Or perhaps they understood it too well. I moved closer to the door, my body now between Sarah and whatever threat lurked in the hallway. The scratching continued, accompanied by what sounded like muffled cursing. Whoever was out there was growing frustrated with their lack of progress. Good. Let them be frustrated. Let them make mistakes. The digital clock now read 3:12 a.m., and I realized that 5 minutes had passed since the footsteps first stopped. 5 minutes of someone standing outside our door, working on our lock, breathing air thick with gasoline fumes. My mind raced through my options. I could bark, wake Sarah, and alert the entire floor to the danger. But what if that triggered whatever this person was planning? What if the gasoline smell meant they were prepared to create a fire, and my alarm would cause them to panic and act immediately? Sarah's breathing shifted again, deeper now, as if she was entering a different phase of sleep. Part of me wanted to wake her, to let her sharp legal mind analyze this situation. But another part of me, the part that had been bred and trained to be her protector, knew that this was my responsibility. She had given me her trust, her safety, her very life, and I would not let some predator in a hotel hallway take that away from either of us. The scratching stopped. In the sudden silence, I could hear something far worse than the mechanical manipulation of our lock. I could hear breathing, slow, controlled, deliberate breathing just inches away from where we slept. Someone was standing directly outside our door, and they were preparing for whatever came next. Have you ever felt the exact moment when everything you've trained for your entire life suddenly becomes real? When theory transforms into life or death reality? That moment arrived at 3:14 a.m., with the soft, almost imperceptible sound of a key sliding into our lock. Not Sarah's keycard. This was different, older, metallic in a way that made my teeth ache. Someone had a physical key to our room, and they were about to use it. My entire world narrowed to that door. Every sound became amplified in my consciousness. The whisper of the key turning, the tiny mechanical clicks of tumblers falling into place, the barely audible exhale of satisfaction from whoever stood in that hallway. They had succeeded in unlocking our door, and now the only thing standing between them and Sarah was 6 inches of wood and 75 pounds of golden retriever, who had suddenly remembered that before I was a guide dog, My ancestors were bred to retrieve fallen prey from icy waters and hostile terrain. The gasoline smell intensified as the door began to open. Just a crack at first. A sliver of hallway light penetrated the darkness of our room, and with it came the full force of that chemical stench, mixed with cigarette smoke and something else I now recognized with crystal clarity, the metallic scent of adrenaline and malicious intent. Whoever was entering our room was excited by what they were about to do, and that excitement had a smell that made every hair on my body stand at attention. I positioned myself directly in front of the door, my body low and coiled like a spring. Years of obedience training warred with millions of years of evolutionary instinct. I had been taught never to growl, never to show aggression, always to be calm and controlled. But those lessons had never included a scenario where my human's life might depend on me becoming something other than a gentle guide. Sarah's safety trumped every rule I had ever learned. The door opened wider, perhaps 6 inches now, and I could see a shadow moving in the hallway beyond. Not the confident movement of hotel staff or a lost guest, but the careful, predatory motion of someone who didn't belong here. The shadow paused, and I realized they had spotted me. For a long moment, we regarded each other through that narrow opening, predator and protector calculating our next moves. Sarah's breathing changed again, becoming slightly more irregular. Her subconscious was picking up on the tension filling the room like toxic gas. Her hand moved restlessly on the pillow, and she made a small sound in her throat, the beginning of wakefulness. I desperately wanted her to wake up, to add her human intelligence to this equation, but I also feared what might happen if the intruder realized she was becoming alert. The shadow in the hallway moved again, and I heard the soft rustle of clothing as the person prepared to push the door open further. That's when I made my decision. Every fiber of my being had been dedicated to being silent, obedient, invisible, when Sarah didn't need me. But she needed me now more than she had ever needed me before, and silence was no longer an option. I released a low, rumbling growl that seemed to come from somewhere deep in my chest, somewhere I had never accessed before. It wasn't the playful vocalization I sometimes made during our training games, or the whine I used when I needed to alert Sarah to obstacles. This was something primal, a sound that spoke in a language older than human civilization. It said clearly and unmistakably, "You are not welcome here, you will not pass. You will have to go through me first." The shadow froze. I could hear the sharp intake of breath, the slight shuffle of feet as the person in the hallway recalculated their plan. They had expected an empty room with a sleeping victim, not a guardian who was very much awake and very much opposed to their presence. The gasoline smell wavered as if the person had stepped back slightly, and I allowed myself a moment of grim satisfaction. Good. Let them hesitate. Let them doubt. Behind me, Sarah stirred more noticeably. "Max," she whispered, her voice thick with sleep, but carrying that edge of alertness that told me her lawyer's instincts were kicking in. She couldn't see what was happening, but she could hear my growl, and she knew that I never growled without cause. The tone of her voice changed everything. This was no longer just about my protective instincts. This was about both of us, together, facing whatever was trying to enter our sanctuary. What do you do when the person you've sworn to protect finally awakens to danger, but you realize that her awareness might be the very thing that triggers catastrophe? Sarah's whispered, "Max," hung in the air like a loaded weapon, and I could feel the energy in the hallway shift as the intruder processed this new development. The breathing on the other side of the door became more rapid, more shallow, and the gasoline smell intensified as if the person was becoming agitated. I maintained my position directly in front of the door, my body a living barrier between Sarah and whatever malevolent force waited in that hallway. My growl deepened, becoming more continuous now, a low rumble that I felt in my chest as much as I heard with my ears. Every muscle in my body was coiled tight, ready to explode into action the moment that door moved another inch. but I was also calculating, weighing options with an intelligence that years of guide work had sharpened to razor precision. "Max, what is it?" Sarah's voice was clearer now, fully awake, and I could hear her shifting in the bed behind me. The springs creaked as she sat up, and I knew she was oriented toward the door, her head tilted in that particular way that meant she was listening with every fiber of her being. Sarah's hearing was extraordinary, developed to compensate for her lack of sight, and I realized she was probably picking up sounds that even my sensitive ears might miss. The door trembled slightly, as if the person in the hallway was testing its weight, seeing how much resistance they would face if they tried to push it open quickly. The metallic smell of their sweat mixed with the gasoline and cigarettes, creating an olfactory cocktail that spoke of desperation and dangerous intent. Whoever this was, they were committed to their course of action, but my presence was forcing them to recalculate their approach. "There's someone at our door," Sarah whispered, her voice so low I almost didn't catch it. But I heard the steel underneath the quiet words, the tone that told me her legal mind was already analyzing the situation, looking for options and escape routes. She was afraid. I could smell her fear mixing with my own, but she wasn't panicking. That gave me strength. I shifted my weight slightly, adjusting my position to better block the doorway. If this person tried to rush through, they would have to physically move me first, and I had no intention of making that easy. My paws gripped the carpet for better traction, and I lowered my head slightly, presenting a more formidable silhouette in case they could see me through that crack in the door. The breathing in the hallway stopped, complete silence for perhaps 10 seconds that felt like hours. Then I heard something that made my blood freeze, the soft sound of liquid being poured. The gasoline smell exploded in intensity, and I realized with horror what was happening. This wasn't just a break-in, this was something far worse. The person in the hallway was spreading accelerant, preparing to turn our room into an inferno. "Sarah," I whined, breaking my silence, trying to communicate the urgency of our situation. She understood immediately. We had developed our own language over the years, and my tone told her everything she needed to know. I heard her moving quickly now, reaching for something. The hotel phone. But would there be time for help to arrive? The pouring sound continued, and I could see a thin, dark line appearing under the door as liquid spread across the hallway carpet. The chemical smell was so intense now that my eyes began to water, and I had to resist the urge to back away from the door. Every instinct screamed at me to retreat, to get Sarah and myself away from this toxic atmosphere, but I couldn't leave my post. If I moved, that door could swing wide open, and whatever plan this person had would be unleashed upon us. 911, Sarah was saying into the phone, her voice steady, despite the terror I could smell radiating from her. "Someone is trying to break into room 412 at the Grand Plaza Hotel. They have gasoline. I think they're going to try to set our room on fire." The movement in the hallway stopped abruptly. Whoever was out there had heard her voice, understood that their window of opportunity was closing rapidly. I braced myself, knowing that the next few seconds would determine whether we lived or died. The person in the hallway was about to make their move, and I was the only thing standing between them and Sarah. A hand appeared in the crack of the door, pushing it wider, and I saw my first glimpse of our would-be killer. Have you ever wondered what true courage looks like? It's not the absence of fear. It's acting despite terror so intense it threatens to paralyze every muscle in your body. The hand pushing through our doorway was weathered and stained, fingers yellow from cigarettes, and clutched between them was something that made my blood turn to ice, a lit cigarette, glowing like a tiny demon's eye in the darkness of the hallway. The door swung wider, and I got my first full look at the person who had been stalking us through this night of horror. A thin man in his 40s, wild-eyed and desperate, with clothes that reeked of gasoline and something darker, the smell of someone who had given up on everything, including his own life. His face was gaunt, marked by the kind of desperation that makes people capable of unthinkable acts, and when his eyes met mine through the doorway, I saw something that chilled me to my bones. He wasn't just planning to hurt Sarah, he was planning to die with us. "Get away from the door, dog," he hissed, his voice a raspy whisper that spoke of too many cigarettes and too much desperation. "This doesn't concern you." But he was wrong. This concerned me more than anything had ever concerned me in my entire life. I planted my paws wider, lowering my center of gravity, and released a growl that seemed to come from the very core of my being. This man would not pass, he would not reach Sarah. He would not turn our room into the crematorium he had planned. Behind me, I could hear Sarah speaking rapidly into the phone, giving the emergency operator details about our location, about the gasoline, about the imminent threat. Her voice was steady, professional, but I could smell her terror mixing with my own, creating an atmosphere thick with the knowledge that help might not arrive in time. The man stepped fully into the doorway now, and I could see the full extent of his preparation. Gasoline soaked his clothes, turned the hallway carpet dark with flammable liquid, and dripped from a red plastic container in his free hand. He had planned this meticulously, chosen his moment carefully, but he hadn't planned for me. He hadn't expected resistance from a guide dog trained to be gentle and obedient. "I said move," he snarled, taking another step into our room. The cigarette in his hand trembled, ash falling toward the gasoline-soaked carpet, and I realized we were seconds away from an explosion that would kill all three of us. That's when something extraordinary happened. Every lesson I had ever learned about obedience, about being calm and controlled, about never showing aggression, simply evaporated. In its place rose something primal and powerful, something that connected me to every dog who had ever stood between their pack and danger. I launched myself at the intruder with a fury that surprised even me. My 75 pounds of muscle and determination slammed into his legs, sending him stumbling backward into the hallway. The cigarette flew from his fingers, spinning through the air like a falling star, and I heard his sharp cry of surprise and pain as we both crashed to the floor. The gasoline container clanged against the wall, spilling its contents across the hallway carpet in an expanding pool of potential destruction. "Max!" Sarah's voice cut through the chaos, and I could hear her moving behind me, the phone still in her hand, as she called out our location to the emergency operator. But I couldn't turn to reassure her. The man beneath me was struggling, trying to reach for something in his pocket, and I realized with horror that he had more than one way to start the fire he so desperately wanted. I clamped my jaws around his wrist, not to hurt him, but to prevent him from reaching whatever weapon he was grasping for. My training had taught me to use minimum force, but my instincts were screaming that this was a fight to the death. The man's free hand clawed at my face, trying to force me to release him, but I held on with the tenacity that had been bred into my ancestors for generations. The hallway erupted in the sound of running footsteps, multiple people approaching fast. Hotel security, perhaps, or maybe the police responding to Sarah's call. The man beneath me heard them too, and his struggles became more frantic, more desperate. He managed to wrench one hand free and pulled something from his pocket, a small metal object that glinted in the hallway light. A lighter. He had a backup plan, and he was reaching toward the gasoline-soaked carpet with shaking fingers. I released his wrist and lunged for his other hand, my teeth closing around his fingers just as the flame sparked to life. The lighter flew from his grasp, skittering across the wet carpet, its flame extinguished by the impact. "Police! Step away from the door!" Voices shouted from the end of the hallway, and I could see flashlight beams cutting through the darkness, illuminating the scene of our desperate struggle. The man beneath me went limp, the fight suddenly draining out of him as he realized his plan had failed. His moment of destruction had passed. Sarah appeared in the doorway behind me, her hand trailing along the wall for guidance, her face pale but determined. "Max," she called softly, and I heard in her voice a mixture of pride, relief, and love that made my heart swell, even in the midst of this chaos. I had done it. I had protected her. I had stood between her and the darkness, and we had both survived. What does victory smell like when it's mixed with gasoline fumes? and the lingering scent of terror. As the police officers secured the scene and paramedics checked both Sarah and me for injuries, I learned that triumph has its own unique odor. Relief so profound it seems to change the very air around you. The man who had tried to turn us into a statistic was now handcuffed and being led away, his plans for destruction reduced to evidence bags and police reports. Detective Maria Rodriguez, a woman whose calm presence seemed to fill the chaotic hallway, knelt beside me as I finally allowed myself to relax for the first time in what felt like hours. "This dog saved your life," she told Sarah, scratching behind my ears with the confident touch of someone who understood animals. "Without his intervention, we would be dealing with a very different crime scene right now." Sarah's hand found my head, her fingers trembling slightly as they traced the familiar contours of my ears and muzzle. She was checking for injuries, but I knew she was also reconnecting with me, assuring herself that we were both truly safe. "He's been my eyes for 3 years," she said softly, her voice thick with emotion. "Tonight, he was my guardian angel." The hotel manager, a nervous man named James Crawford, arrived with apologies and explanations that seemed inadequate in the face of what had nearly happened. The investigation revealed that our would-be attacker, Robert Lynch, was a former hotel maintenance worker who had been fired 6 months earlier for erratic behavior and suspected drug use. He had kept copies of master keys and had been returning to the hotel, targeting female guests traveling alone. "He had been watching you for 2 days, Detective Rodriguez explained as we sat in the hotel's conference room, the gasoline-soaked hallway finally being cleaned by hazmat specialists. "Security footage shows him in the lobby when you checked in, following you to the elevator, even walking past your door several times yesterday evening. You were selected as his target, but he didn't count on your 4-legged security system." The lighter they found in the hallway had his fingerprints on it, along with receipts in his pocket for the gasoline he had purchased earlier that evening. Lynch had planned to kill Sarah and then himself, consumed by a rage that had been building since he lost his job. But he had made one crucial miscalculation. He had assumed that a guide dog would be nothing more than a passive observer. As dawn broke over Chicago, casting golden light through the conference room windows, I reflected on how this night had changed me. I was still Sarah's guide dog, still trained to help her navigate the world safely, but I had discovered something new about myself. I was also her protector in ways that went far beyond traffic patterns and curb heights. I was her guardian against the darkness that sometimes walked on 2 legs through hotel hallways at 3 in the morning. The hotel moved us to a new room on a different floor, one with additional security measures and a door that locked from the inside with a deadbolt. But more importantly, they provided us with something we had temporarily lost: the ability to sleep peacefully. As Sarah finally settled into bed as the sun rose, I took up my familiar position beside her, but with a new understanding of my role. "Max," she whispered as she drifted towards sleep, "I knew something was wrong when you started growling. I trust you completely. But tonight I learned that my trust has been even more important than I realized. You didn't just guide me away from traffic or obstacles today. You guided us both away from death." Her words settled into my heart like a warm blanket. This was what I had been born to do, trained to do, bred to do across countless generations. Not just to be her eyes, but to be her shield against a world that could sometimes be cruel and dangerous. The bond between us had been forged in routine and trust, but tonight it had been tempered in fire and proven unbreakable. The investigation continued for weeks afterward, revealing that Lynch had targeted 4 other hotels in the city, though we had been his first actual attempt. The evidence we provided helped convict him and potentially saved other lives. Sarah received recognition from the National Federation of the Blind for her quick thinking during the crisis, but I knew the real hero was the partnership between us, human intelligence and canine instinct, working together when it mattered most. 6 months later, as I write this story in my memory, Sarah and I still travel for her work. We stay in hotels, walk through cities, navigate the complex world that requires both sight and insight. But now we both understand something that we hadn't fully grasped before that night in Chicago. At 3 a.m., fear has a scent, danger has a sound, and evil has a presence that can be detected by those who know how to listen. But courage, true courage, smells stronger than them all. It smells like loyalty, like love, like the unbreakable bond between a human and the dog who would stand between her and any darkness that dared to approach. It smells like home, like safety, like the knowledge that some bonds are stronger than fear itself. And that, dear listener, is a scent worth protecting.